Dear Thay, dear Sangha, we're taught that gently following our breath, calming our body and mind, dwelling in the present moment, can transform our suffering and help us realize peace and happiness. Recognizing our suffering, accepting our suffering, embracing it, looking deeply at it, and cultivating the insight of interbeing and right view can help create a sense of wholeness and peace in ourselves and in the world around us. We can practice alone. However, when we practice as a Sangha to develop our understanding and our compassion, our mindfulness will be stronger. Sangha building is such an important part of our tradition's practice. And in the UK and beyond, much skillful effort has gone into developing and building community. Over the years, we've offered Thay's teachings in many environments, with many people, in many creative ways. For instance, now, using Zoom, using the phone, the family and educators retreat, offering Sangha in prisons, the Colours of Compassion Sangha for people of colour. We have an LGBT Sangha established in Ireland and joined by members of the UK Sangha. We have Wake Up, and we have many local Sanghas in the UK and beyond. Returning to the earth, the sky, water, looking at the clouds, listening to the birds, acts for many as a Sangha too. Honouring, touching the earth, nourishing our ancestors, our 5-year-old child, is a really important practice, and again, nature acting as our Sangha can help us. A few years ago, I can remember being part of our community's outreach work with asylum seekers in Manchester who were at the time fleeing from Syria. On the whole, most of the asylum seekers at the Manchester homeless centre were from Syria and Iran. And we had a couple of Sangha members from Manchester working there. They told us that many of the people going to the homeless centre from Syria and Iran had undiagnosed and untreated trauma because they didn't trust the health system, local authority. They didn't trust officials. However, we were keen to offer Sangha there. Um, However, I knew that, like Larry Ward tells us, that when wounds are touched and they're raw on a regular basis, our practice is not to allow the raw wound to be touched. But we know that many marginalized people in society keep having their wounds touched. So it's hard to get the wounds healed. And that's why many people might need an environment without the person or the people that remind them of those that have wounded them and keep touching the wound. I'd worked for many years as an official and in my younger days as a clinician within the NHS, and I'd also managed departments within social services and local government, where I picked up many of the ways of thinking, speaking, acting of government officials. And although I had good intentions to build Sangha with asylum seekers, I was aware that some of my ways might unconsciously touch the wounds of the people that I wish to offer Sangha and Thay's teaching to. So I wanted to learn how people might come to Sangha, walked, how they talked, how they laughed, how they drank their tea, what happened in their silences. And I wanted to practice the art of skillful welcoming. And I wanted the asylum seekers to get to know me before I practiced with them. I've learnt over the years that many different cultures have different contexts by which they define time, by which they define relationships, by which they define position, how people speak, what to communicate with words and what not to communicate with words, and how to be welcomed. And so I didn't want to touch wounds with unskillfulness, even though my intentions were good. So for a few months, I just popped along one afternoon a week and helped serve food, washed the dishes alongside the asylum seekers to wash the dishes, drunk tea and laughed, listened, allowed them to look at me and watch me, help hand out clothes because many people just didn't have clothes. And I did this for a few months before we all felt it was time to come together and practice mindfulness. We also had a separate group for homeless folk and people with addictions, which we offered to. And the centre staff felt it was important that we'd had two separate groups with particular experiences and particular wounds. And we practiced guided meditation, deep relaxation, although we spoke quite a bit because silence sometimes isn't helpful with people with trauma. We practiced walking meditation. We drank tea together. And we shared a lot of folk tales and songs, learnt from ancestors. That was a very important part of our practice together, sharing our history. Kara Jules speaks of how many of us carry wounds cut by genocide, displacement, migration, exclusion, oppression in many forms. And when we all enter Sanghas, we go there neither to suppress or over-identify with the suffering, but to practice, to release the identities that sometimes limit us. I believe with the help of Thay's teachings, patience, understanding, compassion within the Sangha, and space to honour our ancestors, the Sangha in Manchester began to rewrite their stories as they moved on to university, better housing, jobs, and some eventually went into therapy once they felt able to do so and trust a few folk within the NHS. May I have a sound of the bell, please? Just to finish, I'd like to talk about some teachings of Larry Ward from the book Together We Are One. In particular, from a chapter which he names A Frog at the Door, he calls it. A Frog at the Door. So you must read these chapters, it's wonderful. Larry speaks about when he went to one of Thay's retreats, and there were some war veterans there, mainly from the Vietnam War. And Thay talked about how the veterans were so close to the flame of their own pain and suffering that they had to practice only with other veterans so they could heal. And it reminds me of when I practice with the Colors of Compassion Sangha, with other people of color to heal, because the flame of my suffering, of my pain, is so close that I need to be in that environment. I feel at home there, and I feel at home with many other Sanghas I practice with. I'm fortunate enough to practice with many Sanghas, and coming back to my breath, sharing with compassionate, understanding Sangha practitioners makes me feel at home. However, I realize that some Sangha members have some anxieties about the colors of Compassion Sangha practicing together and the White Awareness Sangha, and whether these Sanghas are divisive uh, by practicing separately. So I've spoken to a number of Sangha members, all who understand why we come together to practice, but some a little anxious, feel a little anxious about it, even though they have that understanding. However, interestingly, a few days ago, I was speaking to a dear friend who I've practiced with for about 15 or 16 years, who is another Dharma teacher in this tradition and is a musician too. And she said she didn't feel ill at ease and obviously understood why we practiced together. But she said, Dean, unity and diversity together are one. Unity and diversity together are one. And with her wise words, I'll um, I'll bow and smile and return to Rahina.